And welcome back, Titans, to episode 51, officially our first episode of season 2 of Titans Up Today. We have an excellent guest here, Eran Savir, the founder of Savyon Ventures out in Israel. Eran, welcome.
Hi there. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to host you. We're going to be talking about the opportunity that the Israeli innovation ecosystem, investments in Israel, and Israeli founders presents as of right now, but also global markets, some geopolitics in there. If we're talking about global markets, geopolitics has to be part of it. And really just your playbook and your vision on what's coming next in technology and what is going to be the biggest shifting tides that people might not be expecting. So we're going to cover all those today. So to begin with one of them, let's talk about the last few years in the Israeli innovation ecosystem to set a foundation for those who most everybody's likely aware, but the shifts that have come and why that actually presents a really great opportunity right now in Israeli investments.
So I think it will probably be best to start with just a quick background about the ecosystem here, specifically in Israel. For those who don't know, Israel is this small place somewhere in the Middle East with just 10 million people in terms of the size of population. Also, the size of the country is very small, the size of New Jersey, more or less. However, Israel is actually considered to be one of the best places to build a startup in the world, just third after Silicon Valley, New York, and then comes Israel. Also, Israel is number one in terms of the number of unicorns per capita in the world. And I can throw in a few more facts. So, for example, number one in AI companies per capita in the world. Number three in the world in the number of publicly traded companies in NASDAQ. So it's USA, China, and Israel. So we're very small in terms of population, but there is a high talent density in Israel. So that's an interesting fact. We can maybe talk about it later, why this is the case, but that's the case. Because Israel is such a small market, and also in Israel we speak Hebrew, which is, of course, it doesn't make sense to build products for such a small population. Most of the startups will build their products for the US market. So you get these high quality founders building products for the US market. And what happened in the last few, so of course, there's a lot of talent, there's a lot of VC money in Israel. Most of the major funds are operating in Israel. Most of the largest tech companies, but not only tech, pharma, insurance, whatever you, they have like their R&D in Israel. But in the last few years, what has happened because of geopolitical, and I think everyone knows what's happening in Israel right now, less money is available here, but still in Israel, like every year, between 500 to 800 new startups are being created. So one of the highest number of startups per capita in the world. And then there's like this opportunity for, I guess, for investors to get this world-class founders with amazing startups, but the prices are low. So it's an opportunity for investors. Of course, for founders, it's more challenging than other places. But I think there's also, there's always an opportunity for everyone in this. And we can talk about it later if you want, but that's just to set the stage of why, for example, I'm very much focused on right now in Israel, even though generally speaking, as an investor, I'm globally focused, but right now the opportunity is so interesting in Israel that it just does make sense to look elsewhere.
Definitely. Now let's talk about the why. And this could be subjective, but it's good to get your perspective on why you believe the innovation ecosystem in Israel is like this. One thing that I recall, I'm 28, I'm a young guy, but hearing stories growing up, essentially it's always been that the need to innovate that has just driven the intense innovation. Specifically, one of the things I heard was around water. So it's even when water is a challenge, okay, now we're going to create new ways that we can turn salt water into drinking water, or however exactly that process was. So it's been this constant drive, right? You have this small territory, but this is where we're supposed to be. Tell me more about that and why your
Yeah,
perspective.
I think it's an innovative mentality. I guess there's so many reasons, right? Israel is 77 years old. And before that, there was desert here. There were a few hundred 100,000 people living in this territory, but it was not developed. And so Israel is actually a miracle in terms of technology and innovation and all that. So it comes from a necessity, right? You need to build and you need to build fast. The first years of Israel, the population grew by multiples from around 600,000 people to like it was doubled in 2 years because many Jews actually migrated to Israel. Every Jew's dream is go to the promised land. And so many people actually did that. And so then there was the necessity to innovate, to build, to create. And there's something about the culture of Israel that, for many reasons, people don't accept hierarchy. Everyone has at least one opinion about something, and they're very happy to say it, even if not asked. And so there's always this need to think and rethink and come up with a solution. We never accept no as an this is not possible. If you say this is not possible, we will do whatever it takes to actually prove that it is possible. And so there are many examples how the history of Israel made us educate ourselves and our children to not accept no as an answer, not accept that this is not possible as an answer. This is how we were brought up. So I think everything is potentially possible, and that this is how we think about things. So going back to the example of the water, Israel is this small place. Half of the country is like desert. The southern part is desert. The northern part is actually snow, and it can actually go snowing in the winter. And there's everything in between. There's like sea, an amazing beach, but also mountains. So it's very diversified, but there's not enough water in Israel, like not enough drinking water. And that's been an issue for many years. And up until recently, where Israel actually decided to solve this problem. And then a few years later, the problem is solved, and we don't have any problem with drinking water. In fact, we export drinking water to our neighbors, for example, to Jordan. So I think, and this applies for many things, like things come from necessity. We need to survive, and then we'll figure out how to do it. In many of the major technological leaps or advancement that happened to Israel, not only military, but also civilian, as a result of necessity, like there's no other way, okay, we'll figure it out. We will either build it or invent it or we'll do something to solve it. So that's how it works here.
It's a bit of an uncapped view, if you will, where instead of saying it's never been done, it can't be done, we don't have the resources, the space, it doesn't matter. It's just if we need it, we will make it kind of mentality different.
Yeah, and I think that even if people will say that this is not possible, it will just increase the challenge. No, we will show you that it is possible, right? If people say that it used to be talking about tech, Israelis are very good at building infrastructure, but they're not so good at user experience, at sales, because we're not native English speakers. So we're very good at technology, but not necessarily like we're these expert salespeople. But then some founders decided, no, we will prove the world wrong. We can do consumer product. We can actually do good consumer products, and we can do so. Every challenge will be answered by people that will say, no, we can actually do that. And I think that this is part of the Israeli genome, not to accept no, always accept new challenges and prove everyone that we can do that. And there's this story about going back to military technology, the iron in Israel. It's like we had this problem that Hamas in Gaza, which is actually Israel is, as I said, a very small country. So we're starting to shoot missiles at Israel around 15 years ago. At the beginning, it was not really missiles. It was just like you take this iron pipe, you put something in it, and you shoot it in Israel's direction. At the beginning, it fell on Gaza Strip, but then it crossed the border. And then someone said, why can't we actually meet the missile somewhere in the middle in the air and blow it up? And physically, it's not really a missile. It's not like you can actually see how it flies and calculate where to meet it. It's not really flying like a missile. But then it was a challenge that I guess this group of scientists took over, and then they managed to actually do that. So Israel is like the first country in the world that has this, first of all, Iron Dome, but generally speaking, like a defense from all over the country. Because this was a threat that we were supposed to solve, and we managed to solve it. But it's just one example. Generally speaking, I'd say that the mentality is that you were brought up in a way that you need to improvise, you need to find a solution, you need to rethink, never accept no as an answer. Generally speaking, in Israel, people don't accept authority. People don't queue in line. It's like Israeli lines, like just a group of people standing together. There are many different things about how Israelis work and think, but it's also a very good place for teamwork, right? In school, it's very important for the class to be working together, united. It's not just about grades, but it's about working together. When you go to the army, like everyone in Israel goes to the army, right? Most of everyone, I'd say. You were taught to work as a team. You need to work together as a team. Also in the army, many people get some sort of leadership training. Like a lot of very young people get the best leadership training, and then they actually command other soldiers at very young age. Like at the age of 18, everyone goes to the army, and then at the age of 19 or 20, you find yourself commanding a group of soldiers, sometimes during battle. So I think that there's so many unique characteristics about the Israeli society that makes it resilient, working as a team, very innovative, and many other traits that I can possibly talk about for hours.
Definitely. One of the things, just to go work backwards, that you mentioned there about working in teams, it reminds me of in Japan. My wife wants to have our son go to school out in Japan because they approach, I think it's your elementary through your middle school. It's not about grades at all. It's about teamwork and collaboration. And in fact, they
Yeah.
don't even those early ages. It's just how can you collaborate, work with your classmates, and obviously it's a very successful and innovative culture as well. Interesting point to note there. You mentioned that it's less about grades and more about the teamwork side of things.
By the way, one of the, sorry to jump in on this, but just I think one other very important thing is that failure is not really perceived as a failure in Israel. So it's okay to start a startup. Regardless of what happens with the startup, you can fail with the startup. And that's fine. That's part of the game, right? But if you found with the startup, you get respect. I remember my first startup when I went to one of the legendary investors in Israel at the time. Yossi Vardi is one of the godfathers of the Israeli tech, this legendary angel investor. And we invested, me and my two other friends, and we sat at his basement, and he was talking to us about what we're going to do with the money and stuff. He was asking, and then he said, and this is something that I remember really well, even though it happened 20 years ago. He said, regardless of what happens, he asked for actually one thing. Whatever you do, just be honest, do your best, and don't steal. But regardless of what happens with the startup, even if you fail, when you build your second startup, come to me first to raise money. And why did he say that? Because it's obvious that, first of all, if you're a founder and you build your first startup, you will be much better as a founder, right? You have more experience, you have more network, you have more ability to succeed. And even though he invested in us, in that case, we exited that company and he made a nice return on that. But even though, assuming we would have failed, for him, he wanted to make sure that he secures us for our next, like he would be the first one to get the opportunity to invest in our second startup. That's maybe even more important than investing in this startup, right? Because the second startup is more likely maybe to succeed. And so in Israel, as opposed to in other cultures, for example, in the Far East, but also other cultures where people are so afraid to fail that they don't dare to try. In Israel, it's like you get the honor, assuming it's an honor, but you get the honor just by trying. It's like the legendary quote of the man in the arena, right?
Hmm.
You get the honor just for trying, just for getting into the arena. And that really is the case in Israel. And so many people, like every second, third person in the street that you will speak to has an idea for a startup. And many people actually go and start or try to build a startup.
There's a lesson in there for founders, though, as well. And so, to draw a contrast, you mentioned about the scarcity of resources and the need to innovate. So, I live in Minnesota, which is probably the safest place in the entire world. It's in the dead center of the United States of America. We have about 12,000 freshwater lakes. Every single where you go, you turn, there's a lake with fresh water. And obviously, really great agriculture here. And it's a wonderful place. But I think if you look at the most successful companies that have come from here, they've turned our abundance into just more abundance, like Koch Industries, which is agriculture, different fertilizers and products like that. And it's a completely different innovation ecosystem here and approach. There's not really a huge tech startup community. It's a relaxed culture over here. But I think the lesson is if you look at Silicon Valley, Israel, and just the mindsets of what really creates successful founders and companies and this innovation drive is the even in Silicon Valley, they say, don't build a company if you're going to compete, but they're all really competing really hard. And they're embracing the fact that they have competition and they're fighting and they're embracing risk and embracing failure. And it taps into that deeper drive that's not just, I have an idea and I want to build something. I really want to build something that's truly great and build something that's different. And three other big companies are trying to do it, and I have to win. So it's like immersion into the risk and the fight, which brings out the best of us. So I think that's a principle there that a lot of founders can look at and see where they can put themselves in that right mind state there. It's one key takeaway, extrapolating it to other arenas. The other thing is, you mentioned that Israel's 77 years old. This reminds me of a quote by Joe Rogan, where he's talking about America. And America's been around for 248 years. That's three people ago. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but for Israel, it's one and a half. So
Right.
very,
Yeah. And I agree. Israel is also a land of immigrants. Most of the people who live now in Israel, their grandfathers and grandmothers were born elsewhere. This is also another advantage, very similar in a way to what happens in the US. You will see that this fusion of different approaches, different types of people, and different backgrounds is a huge advantage if you know how to work with it. I think that this is also something about what makes Israel so unique. In that regards, I think if you're an American and you listen to this, you can understand what I'm talking about as opposed to other countries in the world where it's not built on immigrants that tends to behave a little bit different to immigrants, generally speaking, and to diversification, right? I think we understand why it's so important to have diversification, different types of people, men, women, ages, different backgrounds, people that come from the center of the country, but also from the suburbs. So it's very important.
and to correct myself, Cargill. Cargill is our big company over here that does that. So to move on to really focus on the AI side of things, you mentioned that the AI companies per capita is the highest in Israel. Let's talk about your view on the AI industry, some of the innovations that are coming, and what other founders in other places might be missing that Israel sees.
Yeah, I think the Israeli tech ecosystem is quite diversified, actually. Of course, it's very active and very prominent in cybersecurity. Many people leave the army with like the best experience you can get and found the companies. We just heard about, sorry, few
Wiz,
except about the Wiz deal and this amazing deal, which is actually the second exit these founders did. Of course, the other one was like 100 times smaller, but still, they sold their first company to Microsoft. So these are people that met at the army on the first day of the bus to the army, and they learned how to work together for 20 years. And so obviously, cybersecurity is very big in Israel. because many people leave the army with that relevant specific experience and they build things. So this is one thing. But going back to AI, given that there aren't too many resources in Israel, you can look at the top AI platforms and infrastructure, like the models. There is one Israeli player in the group in the top 10 companies. It's called AI 21 Labs. But generally speaking, the AI companies tend to build the upper layer solution. So it's like the application layer. This is where you'll see now most of the solutions. And this is also where I'm focusing. And generally speaking, I think this is where most value will be created anyway. The largest companies, we see that. The NVIDIAs of the world, they control the infrastructure. And then there's going to be the Microsoft, the Google, and the OpenAI. These massive companies will control the LLM and the models. It's also like an infrastructure, but the software layer. On top of that, there's like the dev tools. Israel is also very strong in dev tools. Everything around development and R&D, it's also strong. But I think that the application layer is where value will be created. Israelis are also very good at that. And generally speaking, I think also I'm seeing opportunities from different parts of the world, including Silicon Valley, New York, Europe as well, from the top accelerators in the world. This is where most founders are focusing right now. And I think that this is the right way to go. Of course, there are some things you need to be aware of and maybe stay away from. But generally speaking, this is where value will be created. And I think that the revolution we're seeing right now, at the beginning, people were saying it's just another buzz, just another buzzword. And from the ChatGPT moment back in like November 2022, I think most people realize, like the general public realize, that this is not just another buzz. This is real. And this will dramatically change everything. And I think that we're seeing that. And I think that this is just the beginning. It's very similar to mobile and cloud. In a way, mobile was very big as well, but it's also very similar to the internet itself in terms of how it changed the way we think, buy, build, consume. It changed everything. And I think that this is how big it is.
But yeah, to touch on that, ChatGPT now has 400 million weekly active users. And to build a foundation from bottom to top, like you went through, NVIDIA, other big companies, your compute, your GPUs, the chips, next level foundational models. You have your Anthropic, your ChatGPT, Geminis. Now we're getting to that application layer, and it has been like that. I think one of the big moments that shifted a lot of people's focus was he was the founder of LinkedIn, Reid Hoffman. They had that company, and then they ended up just doing an acqui-hire. Remember, they raised $2 billion of just doing an acqui-hire because they realized that they couldn't compete, in essence. And then that kind of, in my mind, signaled that shift to it's really on the application layer. And so we're definitely going to talk about that, what the opportunity is there, agents as an extension of that, and other things. But one thing I find maybe that connects to our earlier part of the conversation was that, and we could say that DeepSeek essentially did prompt injection, and maybe they did these prompt injection type of harness and then trained their model off of the data off the other model. Maybe that was what they did. But one of the things I do find interesting is that a lot of people just have totally given up in, or did give up in, saying, how can we innovate on that core architecture layer at the foundational model layer to make better performing models? I think we just, a lot of founders and just as a global culture of innovators said, yeah, made that same connection that you did, that maybe we should just let ChatGPTs and everybody do that because they've already done it. We don't want to go raise 150, 200 million just to train a model and then try to commercialize it. But do you think efforts that are going towards continuous fundamental or foundational model innovation are not the right place to focus? But I do know one point to add. I do know that Y Combinator, after DeepSeek had their moment, was the first thing they did was start looking for technical founders who could do similar approaches, obviously the ones, to make better foundational models. Before we go into the application layer, let's talk about that and your thoughts there.
No, first of all, I don't consider myself as an expert in that specific space, but generally speaking, as a founder, you don't necessarily look for a problem, the problem finds you. So if you have this passion, like to go ahead and compete because you have this idea or this understanding of how you can actually do that better or different, you should definitely go and try and do that. That's the way I see it. Give it a try, go and raise money or whatever is needed and do it. But generally speaking, from the investor's standpoint, if I meet a founder today, this is their goal and they're just idea, the risk is so high that I guess it depends on the type of investors as well, right? So I invest at this early seed stage where the company has initial revenue. So anyway, that would not have been a good fit for me for many reasons. I also invest at the application layer. So for me as an investor, that would not be a good fit. But I think that if you as a founder have this understanding of how everyone missed this and know how to do it better, you should definitely go and do it.
Mm.
Regardless of what people say, right? The world was changed by people that didn't listen. And so I guess oftentimes they were right, but sometimes they were wrong. And those who had this perseverance and kept on trying eventually succeeded. Right. It's very difficult. And I also, as an investor, I always remind myself and the founders that I meet when I give them feedback, I try to always give feedback, like what I think about what they're building, what they're trying to do. But I always say, if you really think that this is the best idea and this is so great, don't listen to what I just said, forget it, and just go ahead and try to do it. Because, as I said, the world was changed by people who didn't listen. You might end up succeeding, you might end up failing. And if you feel that this is the right thing to do, just go ahead and do it. So that's why I think about the foundation layers. I think that at the end of the day, compare it to the cloud infrastructure and to the mobile infrastructure, because there are many similar patterns. And if you look at the mobile infrastructure, like there are two prominent operating systems right now active in the world, owned by very big companies. The same goes for cloud infrastructure. Like everyone uses it, but it's owned by very few, very big companies, right? So you can potentially come up with a new solution for cloud infrastructure, but maybe it's too late unless you have something very innovative to offer. You arrived late to the party. So look for another party. Or unless you have this very innovative, a creative idea, then if this is the case, go ahead and do it.
Bits versus atoms, to summarize. So let's go deeper on the application layer and a lot of the value that you're seeing created there. One of the key points that I've mentioned a few times is AI agents. The market there, and it's good we've already differentiated between the foundational models and the application layer. AI agents specifically, as of November, December 2024, had a market value of about $5 billion. And the projection is that will 100x by 2030 to be $500 billion, that market. So huge opportunity. With that, talk about the difference between the applications and the agents and how you're seeing how founders can capitalize and create things that are valuable with this huge shift that's happening.
I think that everything starts with a need, right? We can talk about that more in depth if you want in the next few minutes, but I think that everything starts with a need. So if you're AI agents or AI in general or whatever, this is just a technology and this is like how you do what you do. But I think the main question is, what is it that you know to do, or what is the problem that you have identified? And everything needs to start with that. For me, if you're a founder, you need to look for your specific, unique domain expertise, because this is your edge. When we're talking about application layer, today, your ability to develop or how smart you are or how talented you are as a developer is not an edge anymore. It's very easy to develop and build coding and stuff. Everyone can build applications to the level of MVPs, sometimes even a little bit better today, and it will improve. So there is no there, right? There's no, and I'm seeing around 1,000 opportunities a year. If you do the math of how many days are there in the year, you can understand how many different opportunities I see a day. There is not this long list of things that you can think of AI agent for. It's not like an endless list. So the moat is not that you have thought of this AI agent that no one has thought of before. That will not be your moat. I think that in the world where AI agent is, and I think also agent is, I think that this specific is a little bit of a buzzword, right? When the internet started, and then there was like around 2007, there was like Web 2, maybe 2005, Web 2, which was like a mashup of web services. And everything was a web services. And then web services was this like unique service that you can call with an API call and get a response for something. Ask someone else's server and get a response and mesh it up into your solution. This is very similar to AI agents, right? And now we're talking about how agents will communicate with each other. How will they charge each other? How will they get revenue from each other, exchange money, and whatever? And I think that this will become, I'm not sure if commodity is the right word, the right term, but this is just a way for us humans to explain to each other what is, in fact, is like AI agent. It's like an agent. You can contact them and they will respond to you with something, right? Eventually, it will be like just this underlying layer that can communicate. Right now, we have agent that knows how to write and an agent that knows how to create a picture, right? And an agent that will take this together and will create a post. And startups talk about, yes, we have these agents that call each other. It's not interesting that agent one will talk to agent two and then to agent. This is just, for me, is just a buzzword. The value is elsewhere, and I think that the is also elsewhere. The moat is in the founder's deep understanding of a specific domain.
Mm.
And this is something that a very generic AI will not be able to address because there is a very specific problem that a founder knows and has experienced, and is going after this problem. And also the likelihood of the platforms to come up with this as a generic solution is lower. And of course, if it happens, I'm not talking about creating a marketing content, right? This is like commodity. Generally speaking, creating content is commodity. So there's no there at all. But can be in the founder's unique domain expertise. And then you apply this, or you build it using AI, and you rethink about this using AI. We had the same problem before AI, and it was solved differently. Now with AI, we can solve it in a different way. And I think that this is an opportunity. Now, if we look at all the tech companies in the world right now, including Google, Amazon, Netflix, they have built their models not in the way of AI models. The problem that they're solving, the way that they're solving their business models were built before AI existed. So now they can adapt and they're trying to adapt, but many of the models will need to be reinvented. And there is an opportunity there if you are a founder that understands the space. Just as an example, if you understand the advertising space, the online space as a whole, right? If we look at the publishing space, CNN, Fox News, whatever websites people visit, websites and apps, New York Times. Today, there are two main models, right? Subscription model with paywalls or advertising. In a world where you go to ChatGPT, ask a question and get an answer, you don't visit the website anymore. there needs to be a new business model, right? What will happen to advertising if users are not visiting websites, right? So there needs to be, of course, advertising will always remain. It's one of the oldest industries in the world. It will always remain. It will just need to be reinvented. Content will always remain. People will always create content, and there will need to be a new way to monetize it because they will need to pay the bills. So these are areas that will need to be reinvented by founders that understand the domain. They have an idea of how this can be monetized or reinvented in an AI world. Okay, same goes for anything that relies on user traffic, as an example, right? So we talked about advertising, monetization as a whole, but think about e-commerce, right? If I go to BT and ask them for, I'm looking for a new car, recommend me and put a link here, or I'm looking for a dishwasher or a refrigerator, right? Find me the best and put the link, or maybe in the future, buy it and ship it to this address, right? After we gain some more confidence. So users will stop visiting e-commerce websites and will stop going to Amazon.
Mm.
What will happen to those websites if users, like, how can we optimize Shopify websites if users are not visiting it anymore? What kind of optimization do we need to actually do? We actually need to convince the AI that this is like a better solution, a better product or a better solution. And the same goes for so many things, right? Business models in general, like subscription. I guess you and I, and many of the people who listen or watch this, we have many subscriptions that we use and some of them we don't use, and we don't necessarily cancel because for many reasons, or we don't negotiate, or we don't check, can we potentially change to a smaller or cheaper deal or package or whatever. In a world where AI does that, it will negotiate it for me. I don't need to do that. So I guess it will be optimized. I will pay less, hopefully. So new business models needs to address and try to convince or sell to these AI agents who will come to ask for a discount or will try to understand whether I'm using the product or not. So going back to from the lens of, from the eyes of the founder, if you have this domain that you're an expert in, think about how this will work or how this will look like in an AI world. And oftentimes you will see that when we're talking about, for example, advertising, Google has a problem with its like the main business model of advertising, right? Because people stop visiting google.com. Or I don't say that they've already stopped, but it's going down. And traffic to websites is also going down for many reasons. First of all, because people go to ChatGPT to ask questions and get answers. That's it. They don't click. But also Google has realized that, and that it's like results in the overview page. Like you ask a question, you get the answer, you don't click the links below, right?
Mhm.
And Google is in this problem that they don't want to cannibalize their own model. This is an opportunity and they hesitate. And they have a good reason why they hesitate on how to actually go about this specific problem that they have. And so this is an opportunity for a newcomer to come with a new idea or a new solution of what needs to be done, right? It's not necessarily that it will not necessarily come from the bluff. The same goes for advertising, for everything.
And when you look at AI versus other large shifts, you mentioned that initially you might have, and many people were, and a lot of people still are, they think this actually isn't going to be as big of a change as we think it is. But I think that's been continuously proven more and more wrong, because now the number of tasks and the quality that we can deliver with AI is significantly higher than we could ever do with software. Now it's really the large majority of human digital tasks can be done much better, much consistently, much more reliably with AI. So that creates, in my mind, and I've mentioned this as well a few times, is this very large effort to value arbitrage right now for anybody who wants to build a company. your effort to build something that creates a ton of value, if you're willing to approach it in a different way, like you're saying, is you're going to get a ton of value back on the outside, because it's not like we've significantly started to lower the valuations of the companies that are being created just because it's easier to create products. It's just shifted what remains and is enduring value. And I don't know if you've seen this tweet. I've seen it probably a million times of just different people saying this. There is no moat when they talk about an open AI. The moat is they were more or less the absolute first one to have such a breakthrough product. They were 6 to 9 months ahead of, and maybe even a year, honestly, ahead of a real decent competitive product. And 400 million weekly active users, and are continuously developing and creating new products, new solutions, new innovations, and staying at the front. That's the moat. And that's going to continue to be the moat. It's the execution, not just, hey, I have something that can't be done by somebody else. So some thoughts there to talk about that, the difference in the way that value is being created. You mentioned usage-based pricing models. If you look at a Cursor or a Lovable, the subscription still remains the way to transact. But at a dime, they could switch over to the usage-based model because they're measuring their subscriptions in units that are usage-based. So I think if a founder wants to create something that's durable, you have to be able to adapt with what's right now and just fit in. People still want to pay subscriptions, but maybe in a year, that becomes less and less.
I agree with that.
So to go to further on some of the things that really create value, you said that deep domain expertise of a founder to solve a problem in a different way. This could be an interesting thought here. Lovable, I think he was their head of product out in Europe. And he posted on LinkedIn and said, hey, we're looking for people who can train more, can really fine tune models. And they're doubling down on that as a strategy. Where what I take that as, I had to think about it for a day. What I take that as is they would be fine tuning models maybe around specific languages that are going to be 5, 10, 20%, maybe X better, depending on how much they can extrapolate and extend the results based off the fine tuning. But if you apply that to other domains, do you think it's the same? You just need to, that would be a key strategy that founders could be doing on just really good user acquisition, continuously building around their customers and solving a critical problem and a critical need. Are there other ways that founders that are on this application can create enduring companies that might be technical, or just things that other people might not be thinking about?
First of all, you mentioned user acquisition and just basic business execution. For me, I think that this is the key, by the way. Regardless, except if generally speaking, like it's the basic business rules means that you need to generate the revenue, and revenue needs to be more than what you spend. So this basic truth is something that most founders either forgot or did not learn or don't care about, which I don't think is a good idea, especially nowadays, because I still meet founders who are, I don't invest in at pre-seed stage, but I still oftentimes I get their emails and decks and I try to respond to all the founders, but I still see founder raising money to get their MVP out.
Mm.
Which is weird. Just you can get the MVP out in an hour from now. Why
Yeah.
do you raise money? So this is weird. I think that value really is created when when you found a real problem, you know how to solve it, you solve it differently, and you actually go and make sure that you solve it for your customers. You try to sell it to your customers. Don't give it for free. You try to sell it and see if they're willing to pay. If they're willing to pay, you try to understand why are they paying. Are they paying enough? Maybe too much. You try to optimize that at the beginning. You try to actually look at those very basic metrics. And I think that as a founder, what I'm looking at when I'm looking at teams, and this is my personal preferences. I'm looking for a team that has at least one, preferably more, unique domain expert that knows the problem inside out. But also there needs to be in the team someone who is capable of doing the business execution, meaning telling the story, doing the marketing, the basic things like telling the story, doing the sales, talking with customers, get them on board, and the basic things. Because this is what's helping the team early on to understand if they're onto something, and if so, quickly grow it. So it's not about how you build a product based on what platform you build it. It's really more about a specific problem that those specific type of customers have, your ability to approach them and to actually sell it to them. If you found a real problem, the customers don't care about the technology, but they care about the solution. And if it's painful, they will pay even when you have this MVP that you just prompted and launched an hour ago. They will pay. And I've seen in the past few months a few products like this that launched and within days got traction and revenue.
Mhm.
And the founder's ability to actually execute on that is so much more important than how they built it based on what platform, whether it was built on this or on that.
I'm actually helping a friend start a company, a longtime friend. Him and I met up maybe a year or so ago, and he heard about what I was doing, and he's like, "Man, I want to start something." So I helped him start something with some of his family members. It's a recycling company, so your construction, recycling, building, everything like that. Fundamental industry that will always exist as long as humans exist. Stuff has to get built, stuff has to move, and we were
Sure.
actually pricing out what it might cost. And initially, we thought it would be 15 to 20% of whatever they raise to build an MVP. And then we got deeper and deeper into it. We're like, we could build it for practically nothing. I would say 30 to 50,000 to just say maybe we bring in a couple smart people here and there to make sure it's very specific to the domain, the math is right, stuff like that. But versus thinking it's 250,000, 500,000, or there's some companies, and you've probably heard or seen them, they raise millions and millions to get a product out before. And now you can pretty much get something going, but pretty quickly.
I think that this specific thing actually, or the lean startup, right? The term lean startup was coined, I guess, 15 years ago,
Mm.
right? You could potentially, back then it was like build this landing page, ask people to do something, like fill this form, build your waiting list, and these are your first customers. And you can do that without having the product. They don't know if you have a product or not. They're just signed up for the wait list. This has been the case even before. That's why I'm saying, let's go back to the basics of the business. Make sure that you have a real that you found a problem. There is a demand for it. Customers are willing to pay for it. This is like the basics. And oftentimes it's very easy for us. I've also been a founder, so I'd say for us founders to hide behind, let's build it first and see. If we'll build it, they will come. No, this is not the right way to it. It should be the other way around. Let's see if there's a need for that. Right. I need a lot of founders that have more awareness around the need for customer validation and actually talk with a few tens of sometimes hundreds of customers. And those who actually do that, once they launch, they actually move faster because they have these customers they spoke with. They really learned what they're looking for. They know which customer is looking for what, how much they're willing to pay. So that is like basics, and it's not about technology. It's really about the basics of how to make sure you have something that is actually like a real business.
Mhm. One of the things that emerged from working with this company and helping them get started was the personal thesis that I have is that when monetization becomes slightly more commoditized, obviously the deep domain expertise, everything you're talking about, 100% agree with. But as the product becomes more commoditized and even software as a whole over the next, let's say, 10 years, it's actually projected by just taking, and this for some liberty here, but it's called the Model Evaluation and Threat Research Institute. They did a study, they released it, that over the last 7 years, foundational models have improved 50% every 6 months in their ability to sustain and deliver a human-oriented task. So if you continue that rate, and they even did a low case as well, but their mid-range case was that by 2030, it would take about 4 hours for a properly designed system, designed AI, to deliver an entire software product that would take somebody that's an expert a month. So to me, that does scream that kind of eventual commoditization that's quite near term. And you still, based off what models can do today, have that high effort to value arbitrage. But what I'm getting at is that once that productization becomes pretty much commoditized, then a lot of these industries like recycling, you need trucks, you need all these other kind of resources, a transfer station and recycling equipment, just kind of businesses where they can have a product that's a software, but then also have real world assets. I think that's going to become a much bigger thing. And one of the obvious cases of this is robotics. Like you can't even deny it, and nobody can, that robotics will be huge, but part of it will be because they own real world physical assets that can do things when commoditization occurs. So what are your thoughts on
But
that? That's
yeah, I don't think that it's always easier to look at previous trends and try to understand what will be the future. So I don't think that even if in a few years from now it's going to take like 4 hours to build like a full product. We compare that to the beginning of the internet. Let's go back to 1999. And it was not the beginning of the internet, but this is where like it started to get momentum, the .com. And there was like people were buying domains and were building websites for everything. Building a website was this task that was very difficult. And we were teaching and learning HTML, right? And then came companies like Wix and WordPress, right? And then Shopify. So within a few clicks, you have this website. You don't need to build a website anymore. So this skill is not needed anymore, but we need other skills. And I think that this will be the case as well in here. The same goes for databases, right? At the beginning, we used to actually define a relation database, but then it became something that we don't need to do anymore. So just the quality of, so I guess like the infrastructure is getting thicker, if you will, but we will have other challenges, right? Yeah, we will be able to build products in no time. So what? But we still need to understand what these products need to do, like who is the customer, what is their pain, what is the use case, how will this work? And this needs to work with real people, real assets to connect with things. There will always be challenges and there will always be a need for smart people, the technical ability to understand. Today I'm 50 years old, but when I was 10 many years ago, I got my first computer and I taught myself programming. So I always knew how to write code and that helped me understand how things work. Now, there's this new generation of AI product and solution. Of course, it didn't exist 5 years ago. None of us knew what to be done, but we still were learning, right? So I guess a few years from now, there's be those who know how to use those tools and will leverage it. There's going to be companies that have mobile apps versus those who don't. Eventually, everyone will have. And I guess eventually everyone will have the ability to build software in 4 hours or 2 minutes, but the challenges will remain. There's just be other challenges. If you go back to my example of Shopify and website creation, I think it's the same. So I think for us as founders and also as investors, but also as the general public, like regardless of whatever you do in your work, you need to be aware of these AI things that my parents are in their 70s and they use ChatGPT, right? Yeah, everyone needs to understand what is this thing, right? They can't be this, and I'm talking about all information workers, teachers, technicians, and everything, right? Except if you're like a taxi driver, but then you will be replaced by this autonomous car, right? Everyone needs to learn and to adapt. But I don't think that in the near future, the robots will take over and we will have no work. The history has shown that every time there was this technology that came in and shaped and reshaped everything, more value was created, more wealth was created, more opportunities were created. We just need to make sure that we're on top of this. Because right now, if you're a founder right now, you are a founder in one of the best and most amazing times to be a founder in the history of humanity, right? It is so easy to be a builder right now. You can really focus on what matters. And this is so exciting. So I think that if you're a founder, you're lucky.
Definitely. And it goes back to that Elon Musk quote, which is probably said by somebody else, but he was interviewed back, I think it was 2007, maybe. It was really when Tesla was just getting started. And he was being interviewed, and he said the rarest element on the earth is not money. It's not all these things, resources and whatnot. It is a small group of people who are willing to work relentlessly to solve a problem in the absolute best way.
Yeah. I completely agree with that. And this will not change, right? There will always be new problems and we will always need smart people who are willing to work hard and solve problems.
What are some companies or some examples in the application layer, or maybe some of your firms that you invested in that got you really excited about what they're solving? Any that you can share if you can.
Yes, so I think that so I'm investing in both B2C and B2B. So I think that since the beginning of this conversation, I mentioned that a few times. Whenever I meet a founder that has this unique domain expertise, this is what gets me excited. I've invested in a company that's called Quack AI. They're doing customer support reimagined in the world of AI, right? I have seen actually many startups try and do that. But there is something about them that they had that before founding the company, they had this call center that they were operating for support to other customers that are not their potential customers. So they understood that we got to a point where this is the way it's working. It's not sustainable anymore. And with AI, it can be just reimagined, right? If you need to reinvent how customer support works in a world of AI, and they've done that. So that was, for me, very exciting. And I've actually seen that a few times also in an opportunity that I'm looking at right now that I cannot share yet. But for me, the magic happens when a founder has this unique domain expertise and he says, what if we need to reinvent this and rethink? Like oftentimes the solutions we're seeing right now is an evolution of things that we had in the past. Why did we need to rethink? Or why is this working like this? Let's rethink for a second. And oftentimes it's going to be like a very niche area that if you zoom out, you'll see that this is like an amazing, very big open. So that in the B2B space. In B2C, I also see, once again, the same thing, right? Many people want to build e-commerce. I mean, we're also investing in e-commerce from this fund, from our current fund. I invested in two D2C, direct to consumer brands. They build physical product and they ship it to a customer. And once again, the value is created when you have these people who have experienced this problem firsthand. And they don't need to learn the problem. And also, when they found the solution, they know that this solution will solve the problem, right? They not necessarily know exactly how to execute on this, but they know this is what customers want. So I've seen that with the company that I've invested in that's called the iBrick. For example, it's a direct-to-consumer brand, with digital subscription, like STEM-based course for kids in the US. These founders are friends from the age of 6, from first grade, which is something I value a lot. Like long-term relationships is super important, I think, as an indication for something. And so what they've done is that they had this after school physical training centers for kids after school. And then COVID came and the business went from 100 to 0 in a day. And they reinvented it by doing this Lego kits, not really Lego, the brand, but just to explain, it's called iBrick. They reinvented the after school course. In fact, they rethought about the problem was familiar, right? You want kids to learn physics, science, mathematics, whatever, and you want them to be entertained in a way. And you can send them to those courses, but if you don't live in the center of Manhattan, it's more challenging, right? So they knew the problem And they found a way to look at it from a different perspective, like reusable kit, for example. If you don't live in the center of the city, just the shipping and recycling of things is a headache. So they thought about, let's reuse the same kit, like take this 300 and something parts, and they took engineers from the Technion, which is like the MIT of Israel, and they gave them this kit and they need to reinvent different models that they're building. So they rethought about this existing problem in a new way. And of course, you need to learn what kids like. You need to understand big data, how often and how fast kids are building this, and so many things that you can do right now with AI. So basically, it goes back to this domain expertise.
Mhm. It's like finding the founder who, with, for example, Quack AI, just dreams to solve customer support. They
Yeah.
just, that's how it is for me with sales and AI. I had 8 years in sales and business development before I realized, this was 5 years ago, that AI would replace everything I was doing at that time. Because I remember back then we would actually Google for leads. We would call the Google number. We would do that whole thing. And I was like, this is just data information. I'm customizing a message to this specific person. All I need is access to that data and the ability to send it. And I've been working on that over and over again. And it's like such an odd dream. Most people, when they think of the dream, but that's
Yeah.
really,
And then you meet those founders who are, they're passionate about something. I'm not passionate about this, but I see the passion in their eyes because they have this problem that they need to solve. If we go back to the beginning of the conversation when we talked about the foundation models and all that, I think that founders, they don't choose the problems. The problem choose the founders. You have this as a founder, you probably know, but you have this problem that you must solve. You just need to do it. And oftentimes after you've done your first startup and it went well or did, you will find another one and you will once again need to solve it. And you will go after this problem and try to solve it and build this company. Founders, like going back to the example of Wiz, they built their first company and sold it to Microsoft for a lot of money. They had no financial problem, or they could have went on the retirement and just go to the beach and drink beer every day. But they had this passion to solving a problem. And this is something that is unstoppable.
they saw where they got to and they got the exit. And then they realized that there was just so much there still on the table, 100x more actually, to get to that $32 billion exit.
But I think it's not about the money at that point. It's more about
that wedge. It's the scale difference, the leverage of, we've got this far, but they still see so much more that the next product had to give them.
Yeah.
And to expand that, it's to connect to one thing you said there is there's the dream to solve X, whatever that X is for that founder. And then when you go out into the world, you're actually learning how to experience how other people experience that problem. Because you could experience this domain, let's say it's customer support, you experience it in one way, and you have maybe 10, 15, 100 customers, whatever reference point they had up to that point. But then to really build the product and take it to the next step, they had to figure out how other people experience the problem. Just with iBrick, that example of, okay, at first it was all in person, and now it's not in person. Okay, so now we're solving the problem for the 150 people who are just doing the in person. And then they had to realize that same process of the disconnection happens from kids who are in Manhattan to kids that are in the Bronx to kids that are on Long Island, all want to learn the same thing from the same teacher or what have you. So it's learning how other people experience the problem and how that problem manifests in different ways is how something truly scales. And so problem solution and then deeper quality solutions. You mentioned knowing big data in the case of iBrick, because if you don't understand big data, you might be able to create a solution of getting that to be digital, but then how do you really make that better and the best product in the market? You have to understand that data. So it's just that continuous, that's the process, which I think I haven't heard talked about in a different way before. So I think that's a good unearthing for us here.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that the different levels of startups, right? You begin by finding a problem, trying to build a solution for that, get your first customers. doing some validation. And then you get to a point where you have this product market fit, this magical moment in the lifetime of a startup. After you pass, you start growing really fast. And I think then different skills are needed, right? Because it's not just build faster and get more supply to the same demand. You need to look for different types of demand. You need to expand for different type of customers sometimes. You need to better understand like what worked for 1,000 customers will not necessarily work for 10,000 customers because the first 10,000 customers were probably early adapters, and then you need to go to the more later type of adapters. So different challenges, both in terms of how you are looking at the problem and the solution, but also the operations of the startup itself. If we're talking about like an e-commerce D2C brand, it's a different story to ship like 1,000 packages a month than to ship 100,000 packages a month. And what do you do with returns? And what do you do with customer support at scale? And what do you do with languages and quality and all that? And the same goes for software, the same goes for any other product. So I think that this is like a challenge that it's like a good problem, right? You want to be at that point, but that is definitely a challenge that needs to be addressed oftentimes, but very experienced people. Sometimes at that point, as founders, you need to bring in very experienced executives to help you with the operations, sometimes even with the vision. And that goes for every startup, right? At that point, where you grow.
Talk more about that vision part. You emphasized it, so I'm curious what.
Yeah, because I think that when you start as a founder, you know this problem and how to solve it, and it actually works. You get to a certain amount of customers, and sometimes you need to zoom out and be able to provide like a real vision. And this is not necessarily something that everyone knows how to do. Uh, and I think that some people have a very good intuition or they're very talented in a way. Like they can actually do that. You sometimes meet those founders who have this amazing vision about a specific area that will look like something else in 10 years. But oftentimes you will meet founders who are more down to earth. They know how to execute, they know how to think about the next year, but not necessarily about the next 5 years. And at a certain point in the lifetime of the company, if you don't know how to build like a vision, it's a problem, right? You need to know. It's like where this group of people were walking in the jungle and the CEO is like going first with trying to find the path. But it's not enough to be able to clear the path. You need to know where in fact are we heading, right? You need to think about it in a more strategic way. And not everyone is capable of doing that. And I think that founders at a certain point of time, they step down. They say, this is something that I'm not good at. And I think that this is something very important for founders to realize. There are many things that we're not good at and we want to improve. And that's good that we will do things that we're not good at because this is how we improve. But there is a limit to that, right? I'm not running very fast. I can train, but I will not take the gold medal in the Olympics, right? I need to face the reality sometime. And that's why I'm saying that at a certain point of time, you need to think as a founder, CEO, as founders in general, are you capable of delivering that vision? Are you capable of delivering that big picture? And if not, that's okay to step down, move aside, take whatever title you want, and or bring people that will help you do that.
Mm-hmm. One of the companies that comes to mind, I'm sure there's a million examples we could do of this, but one is Canva. So Melanie Perkins, she was the one who had the idea and she couldn't build it. She had zero technical expertise. She was a designer. And I'm forgetting the investor, very popular investor. I think I'm not gonna butcher it. I can't remember exactly. But she initially met with him and he actually helped her find the technical people who could build it. And if you look at the iteration one of that product where it was versus where it is today, and they're continuously adding new features, new ways to solve that same kind of core thing, adding in AI and being continuously innovative to now they're a $25 billion company. And she's actually still the CEO. So she just had a very strong vision that turned into this and a continuous hunger to innovate.
And I think that sometimes you also need to have um, like this lighthouse, right? You have this mission statement in mind, and you still remember why did you, like, I'm not sure what is their mission statement of it, but I guess it's going to be like making it easier to design whatever. So yeah, that can be applied to at the beginning to any image, and then to presentations, and then to websites, and then to apps, and then to whatever, right? Yeah, let's make it easier for people to design, right? And then you can take it to any, let's make it easier for people to design cars and houses and rocket ships. So you have, this is also, I think it's rare to find founders that know how to articulate their mission statement in a sentence that is so narrow, but also so big. And you found that as a founder, then it's going to be easier for you to keep on bringing new features and capabilities, because this is like endless. And the example of Canva is I think it's a very good example for that specific thing.
Make life multiplanetary. There's your single sentence. And I forgot I was talking to another investor. It was obvious, but he said, if you look at everything that he's done, Elon Musk, everything actually relates back to that, even Starlink. Because what do you need if you're going to be on Mars? You actually need a planetary connection system that provides internet and other kind of things. So it becomes obvious. But yes, to really hone in on what you just said, I've recognized that as well. And it's so powerful and unique when someone can communicate something like that, single sentence, and it becomes like all these different creations and innovations. So in terms of what red flags would make a VC walk away or you walk away, are there any that we haven't talked about that founders should be aware of? I think we've done a really good job here of detailing some things that founders should be doing, getting that first customer. I like to think of 1, 10, 100, 1,000, go through that process for building out. You mentioned something very similar to that. But what about red flags that founders should be aware of, either in what they're building or how they're communicating what they're building and pitching to VCs?
I guess different investors have their different red flags. One interesting anecdote about this is that up until recently, like a solo founder was a red flag. For me, it still is in a way, but I'm starting to see more and more investors who claim that there's going to be soon like this $1 billion company built by a single founder with a bunch of AI agents. And everyone wants to be the investor who will invest in them first. I'm seeing more investors now say that you can come just by yourself and we will help you figure it out. And I think succeeding is more about building the product. It's a really difficult challenge to be successful with a startup. And it's about the technology, it's about the marketing, the sales, understanding customers, but also your personal balance and your personal life. You need to bounce ideas with someone. It's so challenging to build a business, to get no's from investors and customers that churn, and bad things happen to the startup all the time. You need to be working with other people. And so for me, that's why I also mentioned those two founders with iBreak who are friends from the age of 6. It means something about these people who they've seen each other at different situations for many years, and they are still together as friends and as business partners. So I think that means a lot. It's for some people, it's a red flag more than for others, but this is important. And I guess it's known, but for some reason, I've seen it more recently. And maybe I know the reason why this happens is that when people have a solution that is looking for a problem, you can spot that very easily when asked for the deck, and the first slide should be like problem, like 1 or 2 sentences that describes the problem. Oftentimes, for me, when I see the problem, I can either, yeah, this is great. This is cool. How did he find this problem? But oftentimes I see problem description, people are expecting this and that to happen, or we're tired of this and that, or this is not like a problem solution. And the reason that I think that we're seeing more of this because it's very easy to build. And so there's always this thing about three friends are sitting together in a pub and someone was, I wish there was this thing that does this or that. Yeah, let's go and build a startup. And then what exactly is it that we're doing? And then we're trying to find a problem for that. So this is a problem that in most cases cannot be resolved. If you have a solution that is looking for a problem, that is a problem, like a major problem for me. So that is the thing. And of course, as I mentioned, how important it is for a founder to have a domain expertise. If that's not the case, then that's a problem because this is their moat. And if they don't have a moat and they need to learn the business, then what in fact is their moat? Maybe there is a moat, like they're very good at execution, they're very good at something else. But this is like something that I'm trying to see. How did you find this problem or that you're trying to solve?
Because as part of that, there's a lot of human dynamics that come into play when it comes to how a problem is solved or how it's manifested or how someone purchases that solution that do take time to learn. Of course, if you do, you take that advice of what you said, go find 10, 100 customers you could talk to. Maybe you can shortcut that, but still there's a learning curve there versus I just need to figure out exactly how to get this solution to this problem into the hands of the customers. I already know how the market works. I understand what the solution is, that kind of thing, versus kind of building that foundation from the ground up.
Yeah, but customer validation is not necessarily like a bad indication, vice versa. I think that once you have identified a problem and you think that you have a solution, you need to go to do customer validation, even if you understand the vertical inside out. Unless there is already a solution like this and you're just like, you're a follower, you are doing like a me too, a little bit different. But still, if this is the case, you still need to validate that there is a need for that. And so I think that this is also important. And in our world of like, my way of looking at like interesting startups is that I will look for initial revenue, which is like a very strong validation. I think there's also about whether this is like a real problem, right? We see it less now, but I guess at the beginning of, we go back to the beginning of social networks, there were many kind of nice to have solution. Let's do a social network for dog lovers. Let's do, what if there was a way to do this and that? I think that's also important. Look at a specific problem and solution. Where is this in the hierarchy of vitamin, painkiller, or antibiotics, right? You need to be building antibiotics in a way. And everything else is, it's going to be difficult for you to get on calls with customers, to convince them to sell, to scale. So I think that this is also very important.
So I've never heard the antibiotics one, but basically, guess you have vitamin. If you don't have a vitamin over the course of a couple months, you might be tired, lethargic, kind of things like that. You can replace it relatively quickly. Painkiller, it stops your immediate pain, but it doesn't really solve your pain, but it stops you from feeling it, which is great. But then the antibiotic is like, if you don't have this, you could die within a week.
Exactly. If you come to a customer and you will say, listen, you're bleeding, and unless you take this, you're going to die. And he knows that this is the situation, he will buy the product regardless of whether it's beta or alpha or whatever. He will ask to be the first one to get the product. And if you're selling a vitamin, you are the last one in and the first one out, right? Whereas becoming a little bit challenging for the business, you're the first one to go out, to be discontinued, or these customers will start churning. And so that's also an indication for you. In one of my startups, I had this investor that kept asking me this question: what happens if you go down for a week? How much time will it take customers to contact the support team? And I kept asking myself this question because it's such a simple question, but then it's an indication of how often they use it, how important it is for them, whether they care or not. I think it's also a very interesting indication. I mean, for us founders, definitely those who are building B2B, but also B2C. What happens if you go out of business? Will customers actually care? How long will it take them to know that
Mm.
you went out of business? It's an interesting question that I think we should ask. And if the answer is not like they will do whatever is needed to keep us in business, or they will immediately contact me to ask what happened, then we're probably building like this not a must-have solution. And sometimes, by the way, it's just about how we tell the story. I heard this story. I don't remember who told the story, but it was a product that was some sort of a security product for CFOs. Basically, it was making sure that there's no phishing, and then when you wire funds, it will wire to the right account.
Mm.
And they were selling this to CFOs. And CFOs are not good buyers because their job is to not spend money. And then they came up with this way of telling the story. They went to the CFO and they said, imagine what happens if you need to join the next board meeting and explain why you wired $1 million to the wrong account because there was phishing with this email, and why you did not pay like $1,000 per month for this anti-fraud software. Just imagine yourself trying to explain this. And just by telling the story that way, folks will say, yeah, I get it. It makes sense. It actually, I don't want to be in this situation. Okay, I'm going to buy. So sometimes it's not about the technology, like the technology was working well, but the story or the go-to-market of this product was needed to be refined.
Mm. It's a great insight. To answer your question, even though it was rhetorical, about what kind of system, if you were to lose it, would be extremely detrimental or make you angry, you have to call support right away. The immediate systems that come to mind are my Google Drive or my Google Docs or any kind of thing like that, where I've invested significant amount of time to build an asset or a resource that exists that I need. That would be one of them. And then the other would be like my CRM, a similar thing where you have your customers, you have your data, you have your landing pages, your whatever, all those kind of things built in there. Those are massive pain points. So for people that are creating products, one of them, it's interesting because you might have heard of this beautiful AI or there's gamma AI. Basically, you can take some a PDF and you can turn it into a presentation. I actually have had those, and I've probably used them maybe 5 or 6 times over the last year. Initially, when I got it, I was like, "This is the coolest thing in the world." But now, if that one were to go down, I might lose 2 or 3 presentations. But there's probably another one that I could go and spin up. I could use Gamma instead of Beautiful if one went down. I haven't thought about it in that light. So for founders who are listening or building products, if you can build, and it's actually quite easy in the age of AI, if you can build some sort of unique model or a system around your customers' assets, their data, then that becomes something that if you lost, it would really suck. Like your agent, not only does it tap into your Google Drive, but that's still table stakes, I would say, in my mind, over the next 1 to 2 years. Every agent will be able to say, here, I have your data from these different areas. But it's actually that agent has then used that data to learn and maybe connect some interactions and sales, or maybe it's customer support. It gets better at supporting for all those kind of other companies that if you lose that, you would be just devastated. That's probably a
Yeah.
key differentiator or strategy moving forward.
Yeah. By the way, if you think about it from that perspective, it's not only your CRM and your Google Drive, right? When Twitter goes down, it will immediately hit the headlines. Why? It's not like a must-have solution. We can live without Twitter, and nothing will happen to the world if Twitter will disappear, right? The same goes for any other social. But we're so, in a way, dependent on that for some reason. We're addicted to it that we will feel that right away, and it will be like a major concern if it will go down. Not necessarily because all our contacts are there, our followers and everything, right? Maybe for the younger generation, their Instagram, whatever followers and the way the profile looks, that's going to be the major concern. But what I'm trying to say is that not necessarily things that are must have is intuitively must have, right? Must have is from the eyes of the user. Like how often they use it, how valuable is it for them, how important is it for them. Twitter is important for those who tweet, even though they will not die if Twitter goes down, right?
But they'll feel like they are.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, I imagine maybe if coffee all of a sudden wasn't available, that there would just be riots in the streets.
Yeah.
Because people just need it. So to maybe flip the script, last two questions here. Flip the script on, we talked about red flags for you as a VC, but what about choosing the right investors? And maybe you mentioned some of that part of it in the beginning around the investor who invested in you and said it was the opposite than one might expect. Not make sure you don't fail. It was, hey, even if you fail, come back to me. It reminds me actually of the story that Kobe Bryant told about his dad. When he was maybe in seventh grade, Kobe had an entire season, months, almost a year, where he didn't score a single point on the basketball court. And his dad at the end of it said, Kobe, doesn't matter if you score 0 points or if you score 100, I'll love you the same. And Kobe notes that as the offseason there, he trained harder than ever because he realized that he had that sort of like safety net that was there, that his dad was always going to love and support him. And you saw what happened after that. He
Yeah.
became the best in the world. Talk about some things that founders should look for in their investors.
So, of course, I'm talking from a position here, but I think that being a founder myself and then flipping sides to the VC side, and I think that founders who raise money from other founders, they will find it easier for them to work with those previously founders, now VCs. Because unless you've been a founder, you don't really know what it actually means. You don't know what it means to build a company. You don't know what it means to that you need to pay salaries, but you don't have money in the bank and no one knows except you and your bank account manager. There are so many challenges that you are facing as a founder, and so many bad things happen. And of course, the good things are great. Everyone likes to tell the good things to everyone, but there's so many bad things that happen. I think you need to make sure that you take money from people who either have experienced that firsthand or similar things, right? They know what it actually means. And so that is at least my personal experience with the founders that I've invested in. And I try to be involved, but not to get too involved, right? Also, this is like the flip side of this. I was a founder. Now I'm an investor. I'm not the founder. I don't need to manage the company and tell the founder what to do, right? They need to know what to do. So I will try to be involved, but not too involved. And for me, the good indication is that when bad things happen, I will be one of the first ones to know. And first of all, because I guess I'm less excited by bad things, and I've seen it happen in the past. And I think that exactly like in this example of Kobe Bryant, you need to have someone that you can. This is going to be your safety net, right? They're going to be okay with bad things, and like when shit hits the fan, and it will hit the fan multiple times in the lifetime of the startup. You need to be working with people who will say, okay, we've seen it happen in the past. It's not the end of the world. So I think that the first, at least for me, the first thing that you need to think about is whether this person has built something in his life in the past. So of course, if he was a founder, it's easier to communicate and speak the same language, but also due diligence on investors, right? And some investors are more founder friendly than others. And the ecosystem globally is small enough to be able to speak with one or two founders that got money from this founder and just validate this founder, his approach, how did he behave when bad things happen, how friendly he was in situations. So this is important.
Excellent. Eran, it's been awesome to have you on the show. So the last question that I have is, what is one action that founders or investors, just general listeners, should take today on their day if they're listening or whenever they're listening that could drastically improve their life?
I think that the most important thing is get revenue. So whatever you're doing right now, ask yourself if this will get you more revenue, because revenue equals validation, equals growth, equals success, and everything else doesn't really matter. So just make sure that the task's target is to generate revenue.
Generate revenue. Simple, clear, and plain. Period.
Show me the money.
There we go. Well, Eran, great to have you on the show. Episode 51 officially first episode of season 2. Where can we all find you? Should we drop your LinkedIn, or where should people reach out to you if they want to get in contact?
Yeah, so you can, of course, always contact me on my LinkedIn. I try to respond to all messages from founders. My email is written in plain text on LinkedIn, so it's very easy to find my email. But also you can find me on other social networks, our website, savyonventures.com with Y, Savyon, and in any other way.
Great. Again, we'll include those links down below. That concludes episode 51. We'll see you all in the next one. Hey everyone, thank you for watching this episode of Titans Up today. What did you learn from it? Make sure to drop a comment below with your most valuable insight so that other people can engage in the conversation around what this speaker brought to the table. And then on another front, make sure to subscribe so that every time we drop a new episode, you will be notified. And that way you can keep fueling your dreams and your brain with fresh insights, which can help you along your journey and along your path to your goals. So thank you so much again, and I look forward to seeing you in the next interview.